Hi, everyone, and welcome to the AtScale Data Driven podcast. Today, I have a special guest. It's Vin Vashishta, and Vin is the founder and technical strategy advisor at V Squared. So, Vin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. So, I always like to start out our data driven podcast with the same question, Vin, which is I get the opportunity to talk with some really amazing data leaders. And it's always interesting to hear about the background and how you got to where you are today. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey to and how you got to be a data guy?
Yeah, started out wanting to be a data guy and ended up not being able to because I was in that first wave when I went to college. We had the first wave in the 90s where everyone thought AI was coming. And so I went to school, got some, UNR got a research grant from Microsoft to teach us some data science and machine learning. And then it fizzled. Didn't make sense because the technology wasn't there, the interest wasn't there, there wasn't enough data, there just all of the little pieces that we needed. So I went into traditional software engineering, played pretty much every role in the software development lifecycle. I built and led cross-functional teams. And then about 2010, kind of came back around,
Hmm.
started seeing the potential of data, BI, low-level analytics. In 2012, started V Squared, finally got into data science, almost 20 years after first intended to.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long and ugly trip.
So yeah, were you a little bit reticent about sort of dipping your toe back into the water after the first time around?
Not really. I was, it's interesting. I had a lot of use cases around customer behavioral analytics
Hmm.
from marketing
Hmm.
because I'd done a project in 2010 and 2011 where we had taken a ton of data from the casino gaming industry, player
Hmm.
tracking. And we had found some very interesting things in those data sets about how customers moved around casinos, why they chose the machines that they chose. I mean, there was a lot of analytics that had never been done before. And so I saw the potential and started pitching companies in 2012. That's how I landed my first clients. It didn't end up being in marketing, but it was supply chain because that people in manufacturing and supply chain, they were used to being data driven. So the message made sense to them. Got some early clients, finally got into the marketing side and the behavioral side. Figured out
Hmm.
about 2014, 2015. I couldn't do any of the cool stuff unless I got C-level buy-in, unless I started talking to people in the business, figuring out what they actually needed. Learned some from some very, very smart scientists, people that had done rigorous modeling outside of the
Hmm.
data science world, how to build for higher reliability use cases. And that's where my arc sort of landed me. Is that about 7, 8 years after initially playing around with data strategy, AI strategy, data product strategy, applied machine learning research. Now I'm full time. I've taken my feet off of the development world and the model engineering world, and I'm full time technical strategy, data and AI specifically. It's been a journey. It's been fun though.
Yeah, it's take us back to the days of the early days when you sort of dipped your toe back in,
Yep.
especially on the casino or on the gaming side, casino gaming side, because I think we all sort of started to recognize, if you do go and gamble,
Mhm.
they definitely encourage you to register, right? To use your
Yes.
card,
Yep.
your loyalty card, and it's the same thing with grocery stores.
Mhm.
So obviously that data is pretty valuable. What was that like? And so how did you, and what kinds of things? Because obviously it became very popular, but so how did you get from raw data to actually actionable insights where these companies were changing their business? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, player tracking is old. The
Mhm.
player
Yeah.
tracking cards have been around since the early 2000s. And even before that, it was, I mean, there were old school cardboard cards that they kept behind the desk in the cage where they would track their biggest players and their whales. So this has been around forever. The
Hmm.
data has been just sitting there and no one used any of it. None of it at all. All they were doing was tracking play to figure out comps. and
Hmm.
how many, how much comps they should be giving to each one of the players. How were they playing? What were they spending? They were
Right.
doing some analysis on how slot machines individually performed, but that's it. And it's so, you know, a decade later, we're still in the same boat where companies have a lot of data and there's value locked inside of it, but they're
Yeah.
focused on a very small number of use cases instead of really exploring it, getting more value out of it. Casino gaming's heavily regulated and
Yeah.
it's siloed. So one casino has its own data and it's not sharing that data with anyone for any reason. I mean, that player tracking data was gold, and the system that we implemented brought in data from across casinos, which is the first time that had ever been done. And so we were
Wow.
able to follow players on our company's slot machines around Las Vegas and around the US. Eventually, we got in internationally. And so we were able to track the same players where they would play at home or in casino properties near home when they would go on vacation to Vegas, or if they would take some of those types of gaming trips that some people do. We were able to track their behaviors, and it was novel because we had and that's what kind of got me into understanding the value of a novel data set versus
Hmm.
a data set that anyone could have access to, because everyone had access to their data on their property. There was nothing
Hmm.
new there that they were
Hmm.
learning, but we had access to something that was absolutely novel, and that's where the business value came from. That's where all of the use cases started to trickle in. Casino owners hated it at first, and then they said, "Wait, can we get access to that data?" And all of a sudden,
Yeah.
they liked us a whole lot more because we were providing them insights about their players that they couldn't get anywhere else. And that's, even today, that's the true value of unlocking data, is
Yeah.
getting through either figuring out how to build a platform that gathers data that nobody else has access to, or doing the experiments that create novel data sets. And now you have something that no one else can replicate. So that's the foot in the door. And it's still true with almost every company today. It's not going straight to AI. It's really starting with novel data sets and then building forward from there, eventually getting to more complex models.
I love this concept of a novel data set. So when I was at Clout, we used to, Clout was a company that you create a Clout score, which would basically be
Yep.
your social media score.
Oh yeah, I used
And
to have one of those. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so what was your score, Ben?
I
Do you
think the
remember?
top that I ever got to was like 87 or something like that.
Whoa,
Yeah,
dude,
I was up
that's
there for a
that's
while.
yeah, that's celebrity status. I was
Yeah.
like a 46 or something, and I was the VP of engineering there. But I can tell you that the novel data set there was that we would collect social media data across the social media sites. And so the novel data set is that we could actually see you on Twitter and on Facebook and Instagram, for
Mhm.
example. And that was very powerful and very valuable. And then you could see that today with like I know there's companies out there that are selling data like for foot traffic
Mhm.
in different businesses. And I know that especially during the pandemic, a lot of companies use that foot traffic data to judge demand, so they
Mhm.
could they could get ahead of the supply chain nightmares that they were experiencing.
Yep.
So I love that. And you talk about, Vin, in your a lot of your writing, you talk about data monetization. You talk about, how important it is for companies to be able to value the data that they have. So it seems like that creating novel data sets is a key there. But can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by a data monetization strategy, and what that means to people out there who should know what that means?
Everyone should know what I'm talking about. That it should be obvious. They all read my blogs.
Uh, uh, teach me. I don't.
Yeah, no, I used to have an 87 cloud score. Everyone should know me.
I know like I said, Justin Bieber was 100, so you weren't too far away from
That's
Justin
crazy.
Bieber then.
Yeah, I can't remember what year that was. I think it was 2000, 2015 or
It
2016.
would have been 2012, which is I started AtScale in 2013, so that
Oh
was
wow.
that was
So
I
I was
left.
after your time. I was after you
Yeah.
left.
Okay.
Yeah, data monetization's an interesting concept because data is a unique asset. So
Hmm.
that's the piece that businesses haven't come to terms with. They still look at it as a digital asset, and it doesn't work that way. From a valuation standpoint, data is never tapped. If you think about the metaphor, it's the new oil, right? But I mean, you use a barrel of oil, it's gone. You use a
Hmm.
terabyte of data, it's still there. You
Hmm.
can build as many models, you can deploy as many data products as you can come up with use cases for, and the business has capabilities of developing, deploying, and supporting.
Hmm.
So that's the interesting piece about data and data monetization. When you start looking at what's the most valuable data that the business has, companies start to figure out very quickly in that initial audit, most of the data they have is unusable. They're
Hmm.
paying a ton of money to gather it, clean it, store it, and they don't get any value out of it. The
Hmm.
amount of data that a business needs is significant. It's massive, but the way that businesses gather data today is unintentional, undirected, and it needs to people need to look at it as an asset before the business begins to say, okay, this is worth investing in. Because our investment strategies at businesses are, we're going to build data science teams, we're going to have data scientists come in, and if we get the talent and we buy some software, we're good to go. And technology does not immediately become valuable on its own. It
Hmm.
has to be connected to business value in some way, shape, or form. And that's really use cases. What are we
Hmm.
going to use this for? What kind of business value should we be creating with the data? What data is the most valuable to be gathering from a customer workflow standpoint, from an operational standpoint, from a decision support standpoint? What can we use to support improved productivity, reduce costs, and begin to deliver value to customers in new ways? Use data, leverage it really for growth. And data alone, just by itself, high quality data sets are extremely valuable from a decision support standpoint, basic automation, even delivering value to customers. Customers will pay for inference. If you look at products like Copilot,
Hmm.
that's a massive data set that GitHub and Microsoft had. They had access to it, and combined with, they partnered up and were able to very quickly deliver a product to market that people are now paying for. They put it into beta. It was so popular. Now they're charging people for it, and it's a revenue generator. And so those are the types of progressions where you identify business goals first. It's the
Hmm.
business saying, this is what we should be doing. Here are the opportunities we want to pursue. And then looking at technical strategists and data strategists and saying, okay, so what do we have right now? Or what data do we have easy access to that can support these opportunities and these use cases? Now we're connecting business value to data sets where
Okay.
your data strategist can look at it and say, these data sets will support these use cases. We can use basic reporting in some cases. We can use basic descriptive analytics. And if necessary, if we have the higher reliability requirements necessary to really justify machine learning experimentation, that applied research cycle, then we go in that direction. But the majority of use cases, I would say maybe even 90% of use cases, can be handled by basic descriptive models or simplistic reporting. They could
Hmm.
almost be handled self-service. So the value of data is it's very easy to unlock if you have the strategy component and if you understand how to position it as an asset.
So Vin, how do companies even get started with this? Because I hear you on the use case. Because if it's a use case, it's a business use case, and it's going to
Mhm.
be attached to some kind of value.
Right.
But how do you herd the cats? I mean, companies are big. There's a lot of competing priorities. People are already doing stuff with data. They don't even know
Mhm.
they haven't quantified it. They don't even know what they have. So what are some
Yeah.
of the sort of the steps that these companies can take to get to where they are use case driven and they can tie their investment to a return?
Yeah. First things first, get technology out of the driver's seat. I keep hearing even large companies, large, best in class hyperscalers, you'll have
Mhm.
somebody from them saying, technology should be driving strategy. It's absolutely not. No.
Hmm.
And I'm on the technology side. If anyone should be an advocate for technology driving strategy, it should be me. But it doesn't
Hmm.
work. What you end up with is more technology, not necessarily
Hmm.
more value. I mean, the purpose of
Hmm.
technology should be to serve value, but if you look at the nature of technology, it serves itself. It's self-perpetuating, and that will happen in the organization if we don't have someone at the strategy level who is driving the technology. So traditional strategy planning is changing because we're introducing data. We're introducing a better understanding of customers, the marketplace, competitors. Opportunity discovery is changing because that can be data driven as well. And so if the company has the right culture, if the company is willing to use data and make decisions, make changes based on data, then strategy planning can be significantly more effective. So it starts with culture. You need a data strategist because if you don't have someone with the technology background and the strategy background, that opportunity discovery gets really, really murky. So you need
Yes.
leaders,
Yeah.
data leadership who are able to lead strategy and connect the strategy that's built to execution, building it out, really taking it to customers. You need the product management and the project management layers. There's so many overlooked roles where we hire a data scientist, a data engineer, a machine learning engineer, somebody for ML ops, we buy software, but that's only a very small part of the picture. It's much more of a enterprise-wide effort. And the
Yeah,
business
Vin,
has
let's
to be the
let's
driver.
let me just quick
Yeah.
question you on that because organizationally, right?
Mhm.
You talk about culture, and culture is,
Yeah.
really does it has to come from the top, really. In terms of your leadership team and the like. But so what does so tell me about organizationally, where does that data strategist live? Where do these roles live? Because is it in the business? Is it centralized? Is it at the management level? Is it a CDO? Is it
Yep.
how's it work operationally,
From an operational
organizationally?
standpoint, what you need is you to start off with everything scattered. We have
Hmm.
to meet businesses where they are. We kind of have to admit that infrastructure is all over the place. They probably have some data resources. There may be some of them focused in one team. You may have analysts scattered throughout the business. You may have engineering resources all over the place. You may even have some in IT. Step one is just doing an assessment, doing that basic audit. What data do you have? Where does it live? What data has got value to it? Build out a data monetization catalog,
Hmm.
begin to create strategy. But the first strategy you have to create is the continuous transformation strategy because the
Hmm.
business isn't just going to do this one time transformation.
Hmm.
It's surfing waves now of technology. And so each one of these technology waves, when we adopt it as a business, we have to make changes to the business model, the operating model, and we need a plan for that. And it can't be just what are we doing this year? It's what are we doing in 2 years? What do we anticipate? Even though, 5 years, nothing's certain. But what do we anticipate we're going towards? What do we think will be important in 3 years and 5 years? And so with that plan, now you can move forward. Now you can because you've admitted the whole business is changing,
Hmm.
the customer expectations are changing. So that's where you start. Like you said, it starts at the top.
Hmm.
What's also critical, and it's interesting, you see these early adopters. Disney's a great example. They went back to Bob Iger recently. Why?
Hmm.
Because from an operational standpoint, the danger of technology transformation is that the business's culture gets lost. So it's not just a
Hmm.
culture of data, it's also tying it back to where the business is great. What is the purpose and vision that has gotten the business to that point? So C-level leaders have this balancing act. And so you need somebody who's at the CDO or CDAO level who
Hmm.
owns the vision for data. You need a technical strategist who also lives in that data organization. And so now you're hearing this. Okay, so it sounded like a centralized organization, and it
Hmm.
has to be. That's part of the transformation strategy is to say we've got
Hmm.
all of these resources all over the business. Part of the transformation is we need to centralize them. Why? because we have a low level of data maturity. And if we want to accelerate that progression, if we want to get to a higher level of maturity faster, we need everybody that's doing data in one place, figuring out how to do it quickly, efficiently, get the right people in the room together to figure out the technical side of this challenge, but we're also figuring out the business side of this challenge. We talk about the AI last mile problem, and everyone's focused on, okay, we're going to build a center of excellence and they'll produce value. Well,
Mhm.
they'll produce great technology, but
Mhm.
there needs to be that connection back. So part of the AI last mile problem is actually a first mile problem, and
Mhm.
getting that strategy in place and creating a connection. Continuous transformation does this between the data team and the rest of the business, because the data team does things often for technology reasons. The rest of the business doesn't care. Like centralizing data into one place, the rest of the business couldn't care less about that until they realize their initiative's going to get done this year instead of next year, because we are more efficient as a data team with data in one place, being able to do things one time instead of 5 times. Then all of a sudden it's value centric. Oh, okay, I get it. So it is, you're totally right. It's top down, starts with strategy. Strategy drives technology. You have a centralized organization.
Mhm.
The reason why you do all of this is built and distributed to the rest of the organization through data strategy and AI strategy. There's literacy training that needs to happen. People need to be data literate and model literate, because they're going to express requirements in ways that they've never done before. It
Mhm.
isn't how does this need to function, it's how reliably does this need to work in order to meet my business needs, because models don't have hard coded functionality. They have levels of confidence and reliability, and that's a different kind of requirement. I mean, you're hearing how big this gets. This is a massive undertaking.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you saying is that like having a C-level executive who owns data and analytics is key for this to
Yes.
even happen, because the strategy needs to be set there.
Mhm.
Obviously, that role is important to work with the rest of the business to figure out what those use cases are that they're going to define that strategy and then define the investments. So the question I have for you is then, when it comes to, it seems like self-service is very important. Data literacy drives self-service. So you're not saying that central data organization is doing is analytics for the business, but really is it an enabler and setting the strategy for how you do analytics for the business? So what say you on that? What part of that is which side is of the equation do you fall on that?
It's an arc, because the reason why we have distributed resources in the first place is because we want data talent to be close to the business units that they serve.
Right.
The the early drivers are very simple use cases. They don't take a lot of work to do. So those are initially going to be handled by the data team, but the goal is to eventually hand it back over. That's
Hmm.
the purpose of putting all of these best practices in place, because when they're not, trying to hand over a self-service tool is just not going to work. A self-service tool by itself with terrible data, no processes in place, no governance, security, I mean, just it becomes a nightmare. And
Hmm.
the scary thing is users can adopt a self-service tool and trust this data, which ends up being low quality, leads them in the wrong direction, and they lose trust for data science, analytics in general. They've had some
Hmm.
bad experiences, they get a bad taste in their mouth, and they don't want to try it again.
Hmm.
So it's important for the best practices to be in place, but if the data team is handling all of the analytics, all of the reporting, they're not doing the highest value generating activities that they could be doing. Like I said, 10% of use cases really require data science, machine learning. And if the data team is stuck doing the 90%,
Hmm.
number one, it's inefficient. Number two, you can't, there's no cost justification for it. And a lot of
You
companies are
can't
running into
scale
this.
that. And you
Yeah, you
can't
can't
scale it
scale. I
either.
mean, try scaling a data science team to handle all of the business's data needs. It's impossible.
Hmm.
It costs
Yeah.
more because those initiatives don't have the ROI to
Yeah.
justify high end resources. And so it's this concept of best practices, and then start sending those tools, the self-service tools, out to each one of the organizations so that they can serve their needs, because they understand what they need better than anyone else does. And
Right.
an organization can serve themselves with one or two analysts supporting them. And
Hmm.
that's part of the data and model literacy training, is
Hmm.
they have someone who's doing oversight for them, who's kind of checking their work, who's watching what they build and what they do, and saying,
Hmm.
oh, okay, so in this case, what you actually needed to do was. And so now, one way business knowledge is flowing into the data team, because you have these people who are team facing, who are supporting
Hmm.
them every day, who are seeing their needs, their applications, and the knowledge is going the other way. You're getting data literacy training. Obviously, there's that initial class or
Hmm.
seminar that you'll send people to for data literacy and then for model literacy. But this is sort of that every week reinforcement, continuing education, working with somebody who's an expert. And slowly they're ready to take on more and more. And so your data science team takes their hands off of the things that they shouldn't be working on. All of a
Hmm.
sudden, the ROI on that center of excellence, that data organization, shoots up because they're just doing the highest returning projects.
So, Vin, it sounds like you're describing a hub and spoke style, where the
Yep.
hub is the central data team. They're responsible for, for that strategy, for enabling the business through, helping drive data literacy and self-service. And the spokes are the business who are hopefully being enabled to do a lot of this work themselves. Now, that's sort of like in contrast with the strict definition of data mesh, which is decentralization, which
Mhm.
the data mesh doesn't talk about a center of excellence or that central data team. It seems kind of crazy to me. So what do you think about this whole talk about data mesh? Do you think it's overblown? Do you think it's too decentralized, or you think that we should be calling it a hub and spoke? So can you talk a little bit more about that organizational style and the kinds of things people are talking about in that realm?
Data mesh is so they're assuming the business is where they want them to be. They're
Hmm.
assuming the business is, stage 4 maturity, on its way to stage 5. That's not where businesses are. It's
Yeah,
an arc. You
totally
can't
agree.
just take the business, pick them up, and turn them into Meta or turn them into Google or turn them into
Hmm.
Amazon. That doesn't work. That's
Hmm.
not where most businesses are. Most businesses are at that level 0, level 1 maturity, and they're
Hmm.
beginning their journey. So, yeah, I would love to just put everybody at the end state, but that's not how this works. And I
I
think in
I
technology.
really like that. That's a great answer. Because it's not an either or, like you said, it's an
Right.
arc. It's where you are on the maturity curve, and you're saying that maybe if you get to a 4 or 5, a data mesh might work, but most companies are at a 0 or a 1, and you need to have somebody driving the bus.
And
Um,
data mesh can work at every phase, but you're not implementing it. And I think we do this with Scrum and Agile too, where
mhm.
we say it's all or nothing. And no, you begin the journey of maturity by picking what works now and moving your way into adopting something that's common sense. You're going to adapt to the business model. There isn't a single technology solution that will 100% fit the best business model, the one that will give you those competitive advantages that allow you to be more efficient, more productive, and deliver value in a way that your competitors can't. There isn't, if there was a one size fits all solution for that, everyone would have already adopted it. This would be simple. If there was a rule book and all you had to do was follow the rule book and you'd win, then everyone would be. That's the complexity of this. Is it requires a common sense approach. We can't just tell the business, "Hey, you're AI first." They're not. Most
Yes.
businesses are never going to be AI innovators. They're going to use it for competitive advantage. They're not going to become AI first. They're going to be AI smart. And I wish we were more realistic in the technology world instead of rigid. We can't hold the business to an unrealistic standard, but we can help them walk down the path, kind of take that
Hmm.
arc and get there eventually, because that's what happens with a center of excellence.
Hmm.
Eventually, it breaks up. That
Hmm.
phase three, when we begin to, we've got data science working, when the infrastructure's in place, high reliability, we have the talent, we have processes documented, we have standardized workflows and tools. And when things are humming, then you decentralize.
Hmm.
You actually break the team back up and do what we know was right, but we had to accelerate transformation by creating a center of excellence. Then you distribute the team so that resources are in the product teams that they support or the functional teams that they support. Because the closer you are to the need, the better solutions you're going to create. But if you start that way and try to make it work from that direction, transformation is way too expensive. It moves too slowly.
Hmm.
Knowledge doesn't get across the organizations. You kind of get these data silos. You have worst practices in place. And you don't get the innovation side either, because when you're in these functional teams, they're very tactical. They're focused on what's happening now. What are the deliverables next week or next month? When you do the center of excellence, you begin to build a culture of innovation. And so even
Hmm.
frontline organizations understand that the majority of their initiatives, 80% are going to be looking at 3 to 6 months. They better be delivering in that 90 to 180 day threshold. But there is a future the company also must protect. And so innovation's a critical part. You can't save your way into growth. And so you do have to spend intelligently on efficient innovation. And that's the arc. Companies want to be innovative with AI tomorrow. Doesn't work that way. It's a progression.
I think that's super good advice for everybody. I can tell you that I'm of a like mind there. I do think a center of excellence is really key because it is where you can define and drive that strategy and really drive the culture of self-service and a data-driven culture in your company. You've got to start somewhere, and it needs to be at a seat at the table with with the other C levels, because it's
Mhm.
data is as important to it's important to every function in the company. So it should have a seat at the table. So I love that, Vin. I couldn't agree with you more, and I think it's really great advice. It's pragmatic advice for the listeners out there. So you've articulated it really well. So we're wrapping up here on time. I've taken too much of your time, but I always love to ask Vin a little bit about a prediction for the future. So you can go anywhere with this when it comes to data analytics, data science. So what do you think? What do you think that the data leaders out there should be thinking about in the 3 to 5 year time frame of things that are gonna really disrupt or change their lives potentially?
I think you have to watch out for what I call the Thanos snap, the great business die off that's coming. And this
Hmm.
is really relevant 3 to 5 years. I think it's more like 3 years, where you're going to see half of businesses either become zombies or go away altogether. And data is a competitive advantage. Machine learning is a competitive advantage. If you can get to the point where you're using causal methods to determine what KPIs you should be focusing on, you learn faster, you iterate faster, you fix problems with strategy, operations, products so much faster.
Hmm.
You can't keep up with that. Companies that get there first are going to have such a competitive advantage, and the window to catch up will be narrower than it's ever been. We feel like this is the fastest we've ever moved. This is
Hmm.
the slowest business will ever move again. And so I think if leaders are looking out for something, it needs to be, are you moving fast enough? Are you creating value, not just creating technology? And watch for these emerging trends that are disruptive. You're going to see companies like Google disrupted by machine learning. It's not just
Hmm.
going to be, what we consider legacy business. It's everyone who's vulnerable to how fast all of this will move forward and how well some companies are going to execute versus others.
Yeah, we saw sort of maybe a preview of some of that disruption during the pandemic. Couldn't agree with you more that it's data is a differentiator and it's becoming more and more important. So that's great advice for everybody out there. Vin, You're awesome. I love your
Thank you.
strategic thinking. I love how you were so articulate, and I learned a lot, and I hope everybody else has learned a lot on the podcast. So thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.